Good evening. I wanted to speak tonight about some of the issues regarding someone who has mental illness in Halacha. I want to speak specifically about the broader topic in terms of how it is perceived as an illness, first and foremost. So I'm not going to give a very particular class or particular explanation about how it works in regards to one particular thing. I'm going to give sort of an overview of its perception to explain that mental illness is perceived as an illness, but that there are different levels, much as modern medicine has identified that there are different types of mental illness. So we will speak briefly about it in order to explain the responses to it, and explain that there is a lot of sensitivity to people who suffer from these illnesses, and that just like with many other diseases, when you remove the treatment, the disease can return, which is why we would classify it, just like in medicine, as an illness. And what makes it so unfortunate is that as much as you believe that you can remove it, sometimes it cannot. It can only purportedly be held back. So interestingly enough, some of the earliest cases of it appear in the Talmud. There's a Gemara in Chagiga. It's on the third page of Chagiga. It's on 3b, Gimel base. So the Gemara talks about the question of who is considered a shota. We want to know who that is because in many cases we exclude a cheresh shota v'katan from taking part in a number of activities, or from, for example, exempting the tzibur from the obligation, or from having to do certain mitzvahs because they don't have proper das, they don't have proper understandings and capacities to achieve normal actions. So the Gemara talks about specific cases. That what is a shaita? A person who's considered unwell, okay, or as shaita actually means is crazy, and he's just strayed. It means to be stray from the norm. If the norm was here, the shaita is over there or over there. Just it's far off the path. So it says, so he goes out alone at night in dangerous areas, what Rashi says, and he sleeps in the graveyards, and he goes about with ripped clothing and tears up his clothing. So what does this mean? So the Gemara continues. So these, you have to have all of these things, okay? So they are all, when they're all done. So is that the final say? No. Or Yochanan Amar afilu ba'achas mehen. He says even one. So let's explain Rabbi Yochanan. What does that mean? Id avid l'hoderech shtus afilu b'chada nami. If you're doing it as something that is a completely deranged, a completely insane activity, tearing your clothing, okay, in a way that doesn't seem like something normal going on, so one should be fine, okay. But if you're tearing your clothing for a good reason, if you're sleeping in the graveyard for a reasonable purpose, whatever that may be, okay, so it doesn't matter if you have one or the other. So the different things that are happening, okay, so, if you sleep with the basic kfaros, you're saying maybe he's doing it in order to interact with some of the evil forces that are impure forces that would rest there. Okay, so that would be a reasonable thing. That would be the same thing as someone who went out at night. Maybe he was going out at night because he was sick with a fever, right? There's all other things that the Gemara goes back and forth. So the Gemara goes back and forth. So if you're doing all of these things, you know, it's considered a little bit beyond the pale. The Gemara continues by saying that that if you're doing all these things, that it's really beyond the pale. Okay, it says given the avdinu l'kolol havalaho kamisha nagach shor chamor v'gamal v'naasa muad l'kol. Right, they compare it to like the ox that goes ahead and gores a bunch of other animals, and is considered, if he gores the bull, the donkey, and the camel. Right, those are three things. So the animal is considered a danger. So therefore, like if a person does these things, he should be considered to be, these behaviors assume that there is a regular pattern of lack of cohesive behavior or thought. So what this basically means is that there needs to be pattern. We can assess straight to that through patterns of behavior, and not just because you assume that the evil spirit rests upon him. Because if this were the case, we would never ever be able to help identify a person with a problem. So why are these things important to identify that? So because sometimes we will say people do things against their will. So there's an interesting Gemara actually in Sefach Rosh Hashanah talks about if someone was, the Gemara said, the Mishnah says that that if you were compelled to do something, right? So they asked different cases about you're compelled to do something. They asked it to Shmuel's father. He says, what if you were tied down and stuffed full of matzah? Okay. He says, well, who's forcing you to eat the matzah? Well, what about if you were, the Gemara says, hey, maybe a demon or some evil force did it. Well, he says that if a person is kind of going in and out of lunacy and sort of regular behavior, so if you can identify the times when he's somewhat regular, so then he is fulfilling it. But if you can tell that he is not in his right mind, he's exempt. So the Gemara says, well, then that's not the case. It's not the case where that happens. It must be because some other person shoved it in his mouth and made him eat it. And so too, in other cases, like let's say you did that with shofar. So if you heard the shofar to get rid of the evil spirit that's like being played music or to help you, so if that's the case, that wouldn't work, But if you were playing the shofar to scare away the evil spirits for whatever reason, that would work. So Chazal were aware of different things that could trigger different behaviors in people, and so we find that if someone were to do a number of these things or experience a number of these things, these would be a reason to assume that these experiences can come and go, and so therefore they have to be treated with some significance. So we have to basically figure out which ones are, we have to clinically define which ones are ones that are repetitive, things that are have a pattern of repeating, and that they are going to continue to show up, and others that can be set up for a long time and will be symptoms that can be triggered. Okay, so there's certain other things, but what we're saying is that people can they have to show a certain behavior and not necessarily just feel a certain way necessarily. So so some of these things are really related to a lot of behaviors, and probably more related to things like schizophrenia or psychosis. And that's where a lot of these things come from. So the question is, so what happens to somebody who has these type of issues, where they become either unable to function, unable to live independently, unable to do anything where they could be either relying on taking care of themselves or reliably be around others. So in those type of cases, we there are plenty of cases in the Talmudic Gemara of someone who basically is not able to care for themselves. Excuse me. If a person is not able to care for themselves, then Halacha would obligate us to take care of them. And so in some cases it becomes, an issue for somebody to go ahead and take care of them. There's a lot of reason to assume that they could actually be a danger to others or to themselves. And in fact, I've seen here from the writings of one of the big doctors from Eretz Yisrael, Avraham S. Avraham, and in Nishmas Avraham over here, and he writes it actually in Even Ezer 145, and it's in note 3. He's talking about a case of, can you identify if a person is fit to do an action like giving a get? And so he talks about doing certain activities, and he says that there are ways in which someone can be medicated to make them coherent and not be schizophrenic. So, but he does say that there are a number of poskim who are still not satisfied with medically induced or medically managed certain types of schizophrenia and psychoses. Okay, and he's quoting this basically from the Ramah. Okay, and so the reason why, because the problem is he might actually return to some of the old ways, that some of the old behaviors. So it's hard to identify what is coming from the normal self and then what's coming from sort of this irrational place. But he does point out here that a person who is basically in mental distress and in anguish, or is possibly unable to function independently for whatever reason, then a person who is suffering from some type of deep anxiety, one has to treat the anxiety very seriously. So whatever their condition is, they now develop a new mental health condition of anxiety, and so the anxiety itself has to be dealt with. Meaning, if the person has suffered some other disease or some other issue, such as they've been struck or they have a heart attack or have something else like this, but those things you have to take care of the heart attack because of the fact that it's pikuach nefesh. But let's say it doesn't seem like it's an immediate danger. They're suffering from other illnesses. Let's say pain from arthritis, arthritis. They're having issues because of they're having issues based on other type of medical. I'm not going to sit here and give it the whole medical list, but they're having problem with the heart, problem with the head, problem with this, to that. There's lots of issues that could be occurring as a result of other things that don't rise to the level of immediate attention. But if you don't provide them immediate attention, the anxiety buildup is a real problem. And so this is something that Chazal were worried about in the Mishnah on Shabbos, where they say that you have to do things li'isuvei date, to calm them, to calm the anxiety a little bit. So he brings it down from a number of Gedolei poskim that to do things on Shabbos for a person who might come as a result of the anxiety to be a chola sheish bo sakana, to a sick person who would be in danger. So you can do certain things. For example, sending a non-Jew to run to another town that they should come immediately after Shabbos to come see him. So nowadays that could also equal into having them call and leave a message on the phone, and so on and so forth, or sending a taxi, or if they need to, you can even have somebody ride in the ambulance. Now there's such examples over here. He quotes from some Gedolim like Rav Eliezer Waldenberg and Rosh Shlomo Zalman Auerbach, that all of these things are important, and some of these things even may touch upon even a Torah prohibition. But in order to help this person survive some of the anxiety of their current illness, it rises to the level of chola sheish bo sakana, and would permit you to do things even on Shabbos. So which means that even during the rest of the week, they should be taken very, very seriously, and allow certain things, such as allow certain types of medications to be involved, and so on. But these things, the main thing is to also care for the anxiety that they are currently experiencing. And again, if not on Shabbos, we're talking about caring for the anxieties. We should be very, very careful about how we speak to them, how we talk to them, how we treat them, and how we address their needs. It should be given utmost care, more so than the average person. So it's not so much just simply say, well, I'm doing a chesed, right? It's not just a chesed. You are actually in some ways in charge of this person's quality of life, and that quality of life will suffer if this is not addressed appropriately. That is things. That's a couple of examples of that. Let's see. Okay, let's take a look over here. Let's talk about for a second about people who suffer from OCD. Let's talk about obsessive compulsive disorder. Now, this often touches on a person's own religious practice, because in some ways, a person who is OCD will often become very, very much engaged in what other people think would be a meticulous religious behavior. Really, it's a symptom of their very existence, that everything has to be done a number of times because they're never really quite sure that they've done everything correctly. Okay, why? Because, for example, like constantly repeating the Shema. There's an old joke that a person, when they get to the end of the second paragraph of the Shema, says, "Person's man diz kurvasi sem is called me v'zem krishim lo keichem." Right. So sorry, the end of the third paragraph. That they should be very careful that they should say the Zion very carefully, so that they don't say a shin or a sin. It should be lo man tiz kiru va'asisem and not non tiz kiru, because tiz kiru will be schar, you're getting reward, and tiz kiru, so somebody walks by this other guy and he keeps hearing tiz kiru, tiz kiru, tiz kiru. And he looks over to him and he says, how many times is he going to say that? And the other guy looks up and says, you know how much schar I'm getting by trying to make sure I'm saying Laman Tiz Kiru? So this is a problem, right? You're missing the ocean by focusing on the boat, or you're missing the bigger picture in some cases like this. Okay, and this person also, the anxiety that comes with this, and the depression that comes along with this. So these type of people should try to, get themselves a certain type of therapy, and it can take. And I've spoken to people about this. It can take a decade to help a person get out of some of these behaviors, get out of this rut, and it becomes so obsessive that they actually can't function. Sometimes the anxiety and depression is so bad they can be misukin, they can come into a dangerous place. So this distress is a really, really big thing. Okay. So the first thing is the person should really focus on doing this. Okay. So, for example, the Chassam Sofer back in the 19th century was talking about sending a child to a mental institution, but it was not a Jewish place. So is that in the get of Chodesh Yesh Bo Sakana or not? So the Chassam Sofer is the first one to really, really slap down on the idea that you violate one Sabbath so that you can keep many Sabbaths. Okay, right? So he says that that basically, that he says it's more on Yuma, actually. It's on Yuma 85. Page 85, it says, right? So this comes from the Chassam Sofer, and this idea is actually repeated by a number of poskim later on. The Chassam Sofer is in Orach Chaim. It's in Tshuva number 83. Okay, and he says it over there that you definitely can get him the help that he needs, because if he's insane, he's put for the mitzvahs. So what does it matter that he's eating non-kosher now? Okay, and so therefore, with things like obsessive compulsive things, where a person, if they can't do these things correctly, and I've seen it before with the hand washing and other such things. So if a person is unable to function normally, do their normal activities of daily living, because they're becoming overly scrupulous with the things that they should be able to do, not necessarily by rote, but in a healthy, normative way, they should be taking steps to alleviate this problem. Also because it takes a toll on the people around you as well. So there's an aspect of chesed to take care of yourself for other people. And so therefore a person should take care to not only should other people care for them, but they should also take the initiative to also take care of themselves so that others aren't burdened significantly. So the question is, how do you care for others? So that same Gemara says to take to be Machal Shabbos, right? It says 10 pages earlier. It says, "Daigalev yishachena." Okay, that if there's a problem in your heart, right? There's da'aga, right? Yishachena. Yishachena means to basically to push it down. Okay, so what is because it comes like from the lashon of tishtachaveh, right? So this is a idea of coming low down. Okay, it comes from that same word. So one says you actually should yishachena mida'ato. You should lower it from your mind, meaning to like push the memories and the feelings down. And the other one says yasichena la'acherim. You should tell others about it, which is interesting. So instead of pronouncing it as a shin, they change it to a sin. And so this Gemara is actually really interesting because it does say that. And Rashi says over here, interestingly enough, he says, why would you tell others about it? Shema yasi'uhu etza. Maybe you'll get good advice from them. So there's a lot to be said for what you can get from other people. Okay? So so actually there's an interesting statement of the Ben Ish Chai over here that a person has to say it to other people because the curative nature, he says, the Ben Ish Chai, of saying it is impossible to have with other things, because a person who has this melancholy, this disruptive feeling inside, this depressing feeling, a person can't even express it to others, and that's why it's so important that they talk about it. If they don't start to talk about it, okay, if they can't express it to others, they're not going to be able to move past it. So that's how he's basically saying it instead of just letting it stay there. So it's interesting how they take it away from the standard meaning of it. Okay, and what's interesting about it is that the full pasuk is da'agol v'yishisichena v'davartov yisamachena. Right? If a person has some type of anxiety, put it down, and if there's joy, share it with others. So other people say over here as well on the commentary. So, for example, in order to talk about saying it to other people. So, for example, the Ralbag says over here, interestingly enough, that a person should try to. The Ralbag is saying on this pasuk that a person should try to resolve his fears and his emotional the damage he's receiving from his emotions in order to give it to other people. It shouldn't be something that controls him. That person should actually trust in Hashem that by looking to remove this anxiety and this depression, is that a person should see that moving that out of the way will give them the simcha, the hope and the joy that they need to keep going. So the idea the Ralbag is expressing is that when you try to move the anxiety out, you're trying to make room for better things. And clinically, that's what a lot of cognitive behavioral therapy talks about as well. Of course, I'm not saying the Ralbag is recommending CBT. What I'm saying is that there is a significant amount of expression of good feelings that you want to replace the anxious feelings that you're feeling. In Halacha, we see a lot of that. So the important things to know about halacha is that it's always been a really, really big focus on taking care of those who have mental illness and helping to identify it, helping to take action to resolve it, and making sure that within the community there's always a friendly ear to listen to some of the problems. And that's the main thing that one should understand with halacha's approach to mental illness. Now, yes, of course, there are the numerous issues of, well, if a person does X, Y, Z, they are exempt, they can't do this, they can't do that, they don't have to do this, they can't do this for others. But the main thing to glean from understanding is that in halacha we take very seriously the issues of others, even if it doesn't seem like it's an obvious illness, and take things that are even difficult illnesses to put your finger on, and see how they impact a person's own avoda, the way in which they connect with Hashem. It's so important to take time out to help those people move out of it. And I'll end with one other story from the Gemara in Brachos. Famous Gemara in Brachos. A number of Rabbanim are suffering from melancholy. They're just suffering from it. And, it talks about Rabbi Eliezer and Rabbi Yochanan, who are they have had some pretty significant issues in their life. And so, someone says, did you do something wrong? He says, no, these are Yisur and Shal'ah. I have done nothing wrong. This is what Hashem gives me out of love to make my life better. And so the Talmudim and their colleagues, they'll say to them, do you want a hand? He said, why would I want a hand? And they reply back to him, Ki ein hachavush mater es asmo beit asurim, that the one who is bound cannot free themselves from a prison. Meaning, in many ways, it becomes a part. One becomes a part of the healing process of reaching out to the person suffering. And so that's an important lesson to take with us.